Hello all. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Festool Hinged guide rail for the MFT. I've seen people adapt it from Mafell and Bosch guide rails, but I thought I'd have a go at making a similar system where the guide rail can stay connected but slide down out of the way as you see here. For mounting, I'm using some scraps of 4 and 8mm alley plate, the 4mm to connect to the rail and the 8mm for the V-wheel rollers. I toyed with various methods to hinge the thing so it would hinge freely. I did try using 2 back-to-back L brackets for profile, plastic friction-free washer in between, but done tight enough to eliminate play meant it was also kind of resistant to move at all. So thought I'd try a couple of V-wheels between the brackets, removing a bearing from one side so the rubber gripped the bracket, whilst the bearing on the other side of the wheel allowed for free movement. In terms of hinge movement, it worked great. However, with just the rubber of the wheels touching the inner bracket, combined with the leverage of the rail and roller assembly, meant there was some side-to-side play. Not what you want for accurate, repeatable cuts. There must be a simpler way without having to buy anything, I thought. Then it hit me. The door to my timber storage under the stairs has nice heavy-duty hinges, but it's a light door. It won't miss the middle one for a while. Without a second thought, I whipped it off and attached it to my assembly. Perfect. The wheels on this plate were closer together, it being off a previous partial failure. I spaced them out a little more to hopefully stop lateral flex as they run in the rails I made for them. This meant it topped out too soon. I wanted to keep the max 52mm cut depth of my plunge saw, so I extended the rail up the back of the bench a little and spaced the guide rail out with 10mm packers. This gives me plenty of cut depth now, over 60mm in fact. Because of the range of movement in the hinge, I added a stop to the assembly to keep it vertical, stopping it from flopping back onto the table saw. It's all nice and solid. I suppose I should show you how I made the rails. The V-wheels are meant for the V-slot in 20mm alley profile. Unfortunately, I didn't have any alley profile of suitable length to make it look sexy, so I did what any spendthrift tinkerer does and made do with what's to hand. In this case, some 25mm MRMDF for the rails with a bit of 12mm ply for the backing. I went for 30mm rips for the MRMDF rails. These then got sent through the router table with a little V-groove cutter. A quick check to make sure the wheels seat and run okay, and they're ready to fix. I glued and screwed the rails to the ply as they'll be under a fair bit of pressure. I fixed the first rail in line with the edge of the ply. The second rail, I used the roller assembly itself to set the distance, squeezing the rail tight to the wheels at each screw point. Then it's cut to length and fit the bottom stop. It's just screwed to the bench. Make no mistake, although I don't show it, I meticulously set out the position so the guide rail will lay down true to the dogs on the bench. There is some adjustment on the hinge assembly, but that's best left for dialing. And yes, I've had comments on it before, but that footwear is happening, people. So moving on, slides great in the track and, thanks to careful setup, lands exactly where I want it on the bench top. It was a very satisfying moment, I have to tell you. Now, although this was behaving very well, landing against the dogs each time I pulled the rail up from behind the bench, I was niggled by the fact that the guide rail can apply a fair bit of leverage and will undoubtedly lead to out of square in the near future. I know the Festool MFT system uses a pin set opposite end to the hinge to keep things in line. So, after fixing the top stop to the track at the back, making a pin is the next task to ensure reliable cutting. Okay, so this isn't as much a pin as a solid alley plate, but it's what I had in the scrap box. It's 8mm, so I filed one end to approximately 7.25mm until I had the perfect fit in one of the clamp slots under the guide rail. This, like the guide rail, I want to be retractable, leaving me a clear bench top when not in use. You can see here I've measured and marked for a slot in the top. The crucial line is that nearest the square. This is what the pin will back up to, giving me perfect alignment. I took a fair amount of time double checking, laying out and clamping my square to guide the router here. Hopefully you can see with the pin pushed to the back of the slot, it holds the guide rail exactly to the dogs. All that's left is to make something to hold the pin, allowing for it to be raised and lowered. I'm using a piece of 25mm MDF for this. In this I route a channel for the pin. In terms of depth, the channel needs to be a really snug fit for the pin. To hold it in place, I use a little scrap of ply into which I've sunk an M5 nut. This will take the thumb screw for tightening the pin down when raised. You'll notice there the MDF has a notch taken out of one corner. This is just so it tucks under the bench apron. The ply was cut to match too. Altogether, it works very well. No play in the pin at all, yet still movable without too much force. One final touch was drilling and tapping a hole at the bottom of the pin for another thumb screw, just to give myself something to grip to raise and lower the pin. So when setting this out to fix in place, I squared and trued it to the underside of the bench top, not the shelf it sat on. The ply sheet that forms the shelf bows a little, so made for a pointless datum. Fixed in place, it's absolutely solid, and thankfully exactly where it should be, keeping the rail to the dogs. In use then, I use whatever I'm cutting to set the pin height. That's the height of the material plus a millimetre or so. Then I can pull the rail up, drop the front end on the pin, then lightly push the back down to the height of the workpiece. It works really well. The cut looks spot on against the square. It's nice that there's enough friction in the hinge assembly so that I can lift the rail and it doesn't disappear behind the bench until I want it to. Having done a cut to square the edge of this ply, I'll do my thing of cutting a rip and seeing what the verniers tell us along its length. 33.95mm one end, 33.95 again in the middle, and 33.98 the other end. Don't know if that was beginner's luck, but I'll settle for a square cut within 300ths all day long. It's nice that being a system designed to drop out of the way also means it can be set to different material heights depending what you're working with. Going from 12mm ply to 25mm MDF here, I first raise the pin to the material height plus a millimetre or so again. Then lift the rail, set it on the pin, then lower the back end to sit level on the piece. Another lovely square cut. When I'm done, I just drop everything back out of the way. I know there's a lot of you out there with some form of homemade MFT table, so hopefully this has given some inspiration for something similar if you've ever fancied it. It dropping out of the way is particularly useful for benches in the middle of a shop, or backing to another table of course. If it backs to a wall, it's perhaps not necessary. For my setup it works well though, and I couldn't be happier with it. As always, your thoughts and comments welcome below. And one thing I always forget to mention is I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Sometimes I post sneaky peeks and other things of interest I don't put on YouTube. So if that interests you, I'll link to them below. But most of all, thanks for watching.